Bongani never came home early, not since his wife died. But that night something pulled him back to his mansion before midnight. The silence inside felt wrong, too heavy, too still. No laughter, no footsteps, just emptiness. Then he heard it, a faint sound from his daughter's room. His heart pounded as he pushed the door open, only to freeze in shock. There stood Nomsa, the woman he trusted most, gripping little Lerato in a way no child should ever be held. And in her hand was something that made his blood run cold. Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Don't forget to subscribe if you believe kindness can change destinies. In Johannesburg, people spoke Bongani Dlamini's name with a mix of admiration, envy, and distance. He was the kind of man whose photograph appeared in business magazines beside headlines about expansion power and impossible deals. His companies touched almost every part of daily life: construction, transport, luxury, real estate, private security. In a city that respected money and feared influence, Bongani stood like a mountain of both. Men in tailored suits rose when he entered a room. Politicians returned his calls. Bankers smiled too quickly when he extended a hand. But none of those things followed him into the silence of his home. His mansion stood in one of the most protected neighborhoods in the city, hidden behind black gates, high stone walls, and carefully trimmed hedges that seemed too perfect to be real. From the outside, it looked like safety, success, and order. Inside, it often felt like a museum of things that had once been alive. There had been a time when the house breathed. There had been laughter in the kitchen, because Zanele, his wife, used to dance while tea boiled over. There had been music drifting through the corridors because she refused to let wealth make life cold. There had been flowers in small bowls by the windows, bedtime songs in the nursery, and arguments that ended in quiet laughter because she knew how to soften even Bongani's hardest moods. Then death entered their lives like a thief that came in daylight and left no room untouched. It had been a sudden illness, too fast, too cruel. Even now, Bongani hated to think of those final weeks because nothing in his wealth had been strong enough to stop what was coming. Specialists had flown in. Treatments had been arranged. Machines had surrounded her. But when Zanele looked at him in the hospital on her last night, her face pale and tired, she had not spoken about money or medicine. She had spoken about their daughter. "Don't let her grow up with everything except love," she had whispered. Those words followed him long after the funeral. They followed him through board meetings, through airport lounges, through charity galas where strangers praised his strength. They followed him at night most of all. Lerato had been only 4 years old when her mother died. Old enough to remember her scent. Old enough to wait by doors that would never open the way she hoped. Old enough to ask questions that no father, however powerful, ever knew how to answer well. At first, Bongani had tried. He really had. He canceled meetings. He came home earlier. He sat beside her bed and read storybooks in a stiff voice that softened only when he saw her small hands clutching the blanket. He learned how she liked her porridge. He tried to braid her hair one morning and failed so badly that both of them ended up laughing for the first time in weeks. On those rare evenings when Lerato curled against his side and fell asleep before the end of a story, Bongani would stare at her and feel his heart crack open in a way business never could. But grief did not make life pause. It made life heavier. The companies still needed him. Problems still came. Competitors still circled. A delayed contract in Durban became a legal fight. A threatened merger required his personal attention. Investors wanted reassurance. Journalists wanted statements. Every hour he gave to home seemed stolen by fire from somewhere else, and soon the old pattern returned: early departures, late arrivals, missed breakfasts, silent dinners, apologies spoken too softly and too quickly. He told himself he was doing it for Lerato, for her future, for her security, for the life Zanele would have wanted for her. Yet children do not measure love in invoices, inheritances, or square meters. They measure it in presence, And little by little, Bongani began to notice what he did not want to see. Lerato had become quieter, not unhappy in a loud way, not rebellious, just quieter. She spent more time drawing by herself, more time carrying one of her mother's scarves around the house like a comfort blanket, more time staring out of windows as if waiting for someone. When Bongani asked how school had been, she would shrug. When he brought her expensive dolls from airport shops, she thanked him politely, then placed them on shelves without excitement. Once, when he missed a school performance because of an emergency meeting, he came home with a small diamond bracelet in a velvet box, desperate to make up for it. Lerato looked at it for a long moment, then asked, "Will this make you stay tomorrow?" That question settled in his chest like a stone. It was after that moment that Bongani accepted what pride had been refusing to admit. He could not raise his daughter properly alone, not in the condition his life had become. Lerato did not just need guards, tutors, and house staff moving around her like shadows. She needed someone steady, someone warm, someone present enough to hear what she did not say. The agency sent several candidates, experienced nannies, women with polished references and well-trained smiles. Some were too formal, some seemed intimidated by the household. Some treated the role like any other job, and perhaps it was, but Bongani could see at once that his daughter would feel the difference. Then Nomsa walked in. She did not enter the room with the smooth confidence of a professional used to wealthy homes. She entered carefully as though she did not want her footsteps to offend the floor. She was in her early 30s with tired eyes that somehow still held gentleness. Her dress was plain, neatly washed and old at the seams. Her hands told a harder story than her voice did hands of someone who had scrubbed, carried, and survived. She sat on the edge of the chair offered to her back, straight answering questions without embellishment. She was from Soweto. She had worked in 2 family homes before. She had once cared for an elderly woman until the woman passed away. She had no living husband. Her younger brother was unemployed. Her mother was ill. She needed work urgently. There was something in the way she said that last part that made Bongani look at her more closely. She did not beg. She did not dramatize. But dignity was hanging by a thread in her voice, and both of them knew it. "Why should I trust you with my daughter?" Bongani asked. Nomsa hesitated for the first time. Not because she had no answer, but because she wanted the truthful one. "Because I know what it means," she said quietly, "for a child to feel alone in a house full of adults." The room went still. Bongani did not ask what she meant. Something in her face told him the story was painful and unfinished. Before he could say more, a small pair of feet pattered across the hallway. Lerato appeared in the doorway wearing yellow socks and holding a stuffed rabbit by one arm. Children had a way of interrupting adult evaluation with pure instinct. She looked at the candidate's empty chair from before, then at Nomsa, then at her father. Her eyes rested longest on Nomsa. There was no fear in her face, no shyness either, just a kind of cautious curiosity. Nomsa's entire expression changed when she looked at the child. Her features softened, not in performance but in recognition. She crouched slightly so they were closer in height. "Hello," she said. "You must be Lerato." Lerato nodded. "That rabbit looks very serious." For the first time that day, the little girl smiled. "His name is Captain," Nomsa replied as if receiving important official information. "Then I must greet him properly, too." Lerato stepped forward and offered the rabbit. Bongani watched that exchange in silence. It was small, almost nothing, yet it had a warmth that had been missing from the house for a long time. By evening he made his decision. The contract would begin immediately. Nomsa would stay in the staff quarters at first, then move closer to the nursery wing if Lerato adjusted well. Her duties would include childcare, meals routines, and companionship. She would be paid well, far better than what she had earned before. Medical support for her mother would also be arranged. When he told her she had the job, Nomsa lowered her eyes for a second, as if trying to hide the force of her relief. Then she looked up and thanked him with a sincerity that felt almost painful to witness. That night, after the house settled into darkness, Bongani stood for a moment outside his daughter's bedroom door. Inside, he heard Larato's small voice speaking to Nomsa about Captain the Rabbit school colors and which stars were her mother's favorite. Nomsa answered softly, patiently, like someone unafraid of silence. For the first time in many months, Bongani allowed himself one dangerous feeling: hope. He did not know then that hope, when placed in the wrong hands or even the right hands crushed by desperate circumstances, could become the beginning of a storm. The first week with Nomsa in the house felt like a quiet shift. No one announced, yet everyone could feel. It began with small things that did not appear on reports or schedules, but lived in the rhythm of the home. The kitchen, once a place of mechanical routine, started to carry the scent of real cooking again. Not just meals prepared for nutrition, but meals made with memory. Warm porridge in the mornings, lightly sweetened the way children loved it. Soft stews in the evenings, rich with spices that lingered in the air long after the plates were cleared. Larato began to eat more. Before Nomsa arrived, feeding her had often been a quiet battle. She would push food around her plate, distracted, uninterested. The house staff had tried everything: different menus, imported snacks, even bribery with desserts. Nothing worked for long, but Nomsa did not rush her. She sat beside Larato, sometimes telling simple stories about growing up in Soweto, about chasing chickens in dusty yards, about neighbors who laughed loudly even when they had little. Other times she said nothing at all, just stayed there, present, patient. And, slowly, without pressure, Larato began to take small bites, then more. By the third day she finished an entire bowl without being asked. By the fifth, she asked for seconds. Bongani noticed. He noticed it in the way Larato's cheeks regained a softness that had been fading. He noticed it in the way she moved, less withdrawn, more alive. He noticed it in her laughter, which had once been rare, and now returned in sudden bursts, echoing lightly through hallways that had grown too quiet. At first he told himself this was exactly what he had hired Nomsa for. But there was something deeper happening, something harder to define. Larato was not just being cared for. She was beginning to feel safe again. Every evening, no matter how late Bongani returned, he paused outside her door before entering. At first he did it out of habit, then curiosity, eventually something closer to longing. Sometimes he found Nomsa sitting on the floor beside Larato's bed, braiding her hair gently while humming a soft tune. The melody was unfamiliar, likely from her childhood, but it carried a calm that even Bongani could feel, standing at the doorway. Other times, Larato would be curled against Nomsa's side, half asleep, listening to a story told in a mix of English and Zulu, her small fingers gripping the edge of Nomsa's sleeve. And each time something inside Bongani shifted, subtle but undeniable. It was relief. The kind of relief a man does not speak about, because it feels too close to admitting weakness. He began to trust Nomsa. Not suddenly, not recklessly, but gradually, in the way one lets down a guard they have carried too long. He stopped asking the staff for constant updates. He stopped checking cameras as frequently. He stopped worrying every minute he was away. Because when he looked at Nomsa, he did not see calculation. He saw care. And for a man like Bongani, who had spent years reading people, negotiating with them, outmaneuvering them, that mattered more than any reference letter. Still, not everything was as calm as it appeared. There were moments, small, fleeting, that did not fit. Moments, Bongani noticed, but chose not to examine too closely. Once late at night, he passed by the corridor leading to the staff quarters and saw a faint light under Nomsa's door. That was not unusual. What was unusual was the sound. Her voice, low, urgent, different from the gentle tone she used with Lorato. He paused without meaning to. "I said I need more time," she whispered. There was a silence. Then she spoke again, sharper this time. "No. No, you don't understand. I can't do that. Not here." Another pause. Then her voice dropped to something close to fear. "Please." Bongani stepped away before he could hear more. He told himself it was not his business. Staff had lives outside the walls of his house. Problems, families, debts. The world did not become simple just because someone worked for him. Still, the tone of her voice stayed with him longer than he expected. Another time, one of the younger house staff mentioned that a small decorative item, a silver trinket from the living room, had been moved. Not missing, just not where it had been placed. "It's probably nothing," the girl said quickly. "Maybe someone cleaned and forgot." Bongani nodded. In a house that large things moved all the time. But later that evening, he found himself standing in the living room, looking at the shelf where the item had been. His eyes lingered there longer than necessary, as if trying to solve a puzzle that had not yet been fully presented. He said nothing. He always said nothing, because every time doubt tried to rise, something stronger pushed it down, the image of Lorato smiling again. And that mattered more than anything else. The most striking change came one quiet afternoon. Bongani had returned home earlier than usual, an unusual gap in his schedule, giving him a rare moment of stillness. He expected to find Lorato in her room, perhaps drawing or playing alone as she often used to. Instead, he heard laughter, not the light, polite kind. Not the small giggles he had grown used to. Real laughter. It came from the garden. He stepped outside and stopped. There on the grass was Lorato running freely, her small legs moving with unrestrained joy, her braids bouncing, her voice rising into the open air. And behind her, chasing her with exaggerated slowness, was Nomsa, laughing just as hard. "Catch me," Lorato shouted. "I am trying," Nomsa replied, pretending to struggle. "You're too slow, then maybe you are too fast." The scene was so simple, so ordinary. And yet for Bongani it felt like something sacred, because for a long time he had feared that part of his daughter had been buried with her mother, that carefree, unguarded happiness that children were meant to have. But here it was. Alive. He did not interrupt them. He stood at a distance, watching quietly, as if stepping too close might break the moment. For the first time since Zanele's death, Bongani allowed himself to breathe without the weight of constant guilt pressing down on his chest. Maybe he thought this was what healing looked like. Not dramatic, not loud, just small moments returning. That evening when he sat beside Lorato at dinner, she spoke more than she had in weeks. "Papa Nomsa says I run like the wind." Bongani smiled faintly. "Do you?" "Yes." And she told me stories about when she was little. They didn't have a big house, but they had a mango tree. A mango tree, yes. And everyone would sit under it when it was hot. "That sounds nice." "It is," Lorato said confidently. Then she paused, looked at him and added softly, "You should sit with us too sometimes." The words were gentle, but they carried truth. Bongani held her gaze for a moment longer than usual, then nodded. "I will try." Across the table, Nomsa lowered her eyes slightly as if giving space to a moment that did not belong to her. But something in her expression, just for a second, shifted. A shadow, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. If Bongani noticed, he did not show it. Because trust, once it begins to grow, often blinds itself to what it does not want to see. And in that house, under warm lights and returning laughter, something else was growing quietly alongside it. Something heavier, something waiting. If peace had a sound, it was the soft rhythm that settled over Bongani's house in the weeks that followed. But peace, as Bongani would later learn, is not always the absence of danger. Sometimes it is only the quiet before it reveals itself. The first person to sense it was not Bongani. It was Mama Thandi. She had been in that house longer than anyone except Bongani himself. She had worked for his family before he became a billionaire, before the mansion, before the guards at the gate and the polished floors that reflected light like mirrors. She had seen the house when it was still just a home. She had held Lerato as a newborn. She had stood beside Zanelle in the kitchen laughing over burnt bread and spilled tea. And she had learned something over the years that no contract could teach. When something is wrong, the house knows. It speaks in small disturbances, in misplaced objects, in silence where there should be sound, in sound where there should be silence. Mama Thandi did not jump to conclusions. She never had. Age had taught her that suspicion without patience could break more than it protected, but she watched, and what she saw began to trouble her. It started with simple things. A door that was usually left open now closed more often than before. Not locked, just closed. A subtle shift, but one that changed how sound moved through the hallway. A light in the nursery wing that stayed on later than usual. Footsteps at hours when the house typically slept. None of these things were alarming on their own. A house that size had its own life. But together they formed a pattern that did not sit well in her spirit. One afternoon, while organizing linens in the storage room near the main corridor, Mama Thandi noticed something else. A small drawer that was usually kept tidy had been disturbed. Inside, folded neatly, were spare ribbons, children's socks, and small accessories for Lerato's daily routines. But now, one of the compartments was slightly disordered. Not enough for a careless eye to notice, but Mama Thandi's eyes were not careless. She touched the items gently as if they might tell her what had happened. Nothing was missing, but something had been handled. She closed the drawer slowly, her mind turning. Later that evening, she stood near the kitchen entrance, watching as Nomsa prepared dinner for Lerato. There was nothing outwardly wrong with what she saw. Nomsa moved with the same quiet efficiency she always had. She spoke gently to Lerato. She tasted the food before serving it. She even smiled when the child laughed at something small and silly. And yet, there were moments when Nomsa's attention seemed to drift, not away from Lerato, but beyond the room itself, as if listening for something no one else could hear. Mama Thandi noticed the way her hands paused mid-motion for a fraction of a second, the way her eyes flicked toward the hallway before returning quickly to the task at hand. Fear leaves traces, even when someone tries to hide it. That night, Mama Thandi made a decision. She would speak to Bongani, not as an accusation, not as a warning filled with panic, but as a quiet concern, one that came from experience, not imagination. She found him in his study, seated behind a large desk, covered in neatly arranged documents and a glowing laptop screen. The soft hum of air conditioning filled the space, creating a barrier between the world inside the room and everything outside it. He looked up when she knocked. "Mama Thandi," he said, his tone respectful. "Come in." She stepped inside, slowly closing the door behind her. "There is something I want to say," she began, carefully. Bongani leaned back slightly in his chair, giving her his full attention. He trusted her judgment. Always had. "What is it?" She hesitated, not because she doubted what she felt, but because she knew the weight of words once they were spoken. "It may be nothing," she said, "but the house feels different." Bongani frowned slightly. Different how Mama Thandi searched for the right way to explain something that could not easily be measured. Small things are changing, not in ways that shout, in ways that whisper. Bongani's expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of curiosity. "You're worried about something specific," she nodded slowly. "The new girl, Nomsa." Bongani's gaze sharpened just slightly, not in anger but in focus. "What about her?" "She is good with the child," Mama Thandi admitted. "Very good. Lerato is happier. That part I cannot deny." Then what is the problem? Bongani asked. Mama Thandi held his gaze. Sometimes the people who care the most are also the ones carrying the heaviest burdens. Bongani was silent for a moment. She has problems, he said finally. Most people do. Yes, Mama Thandi replied. But some problems do not stay outside the door. The room grew still. Bongani folded his hands on the desk thinking, "You're suggesting she might bring trouble here." "I am saying," Mama Thandi answered carefully, "that something is weighing on her. And when a person is under pressure, they do not always make the choices they want to make." Bongani exhaled slowly. He respected Mama Thandi. He respected her instincts. But he also knew something else. Fear could grow from shadows, and he had seen no real evidence. "Has she done anything wrong?" he asked. Mama Thandi shook her head. "No." "Has Lerato been harmed? Has anything been stolen?" No. Bongani nodded slightly as if confirming his own reasoning. "Then we should not assume the worst." Mama Thandi did not argue. She had expected this response. Trust once given does not break easily. "Just watch," she said quietly. "That is all I ask." Bongani considered her words, then gave a small nod. "I will." She left the study without another word, but as she walked down the hallway, something in her chest remained unsettled. Because sometimes by the time something becomes visible, it is already too late. Later that night, long after the house had fallen into silence, Bongani found himself unable to sleep. Mama Thandi's words lingered in his mind, not loudly, not insistently, but persistently. "Just watch." He stood from his bed and walked quietly through the corridor, the marble floor cooled beneath his feet. The house was dim-lit only by soft night lights placed along the walls. As he approached the nursery wing, he slowed. Lerato's door was slightly open. Inside, he could see her sleeping peacefully, one arm wrapped around Captain the rabbit. The sight eased something inside him immediately. Then he noticed something else. Nomsa was not in the room. That was unusual. At this hour, she was almost always nearby. A faint light glowed from the end of the hallway, the direction of the small sitting area near the back staircase. Bongani moved silently toward it. As he drew closer, he heard it again. Her voice. Low. Urgent. "You said you would wait," Nomsa whispered. A pause. "I told you. I need more time." Another silence. Then her tone changed, strained, almost breaking. "No, please don't do that. Not here, not with her." Bongani stopped just before the corner, his body still. He could not see her yet, but he could hear enough. And for the first time since hiring her, something unfamiliar crept into his chest. Not certainty, not fear, but doubt. Quiet, unwelcome, and impossible to ignore. The word doubt did not sit comfortably in Bongani's mind. It moved slowly, like something unfamiliar testing the edges of a space that had long been controlled. For years, Bongani had trusted his judgment above all else. It was what made him powerful, what made him decisive, what made men twice his age hesitate before speaking against him in boardrooms. He was not a man who guessed, he was a man who knew. And yet that night, standing in the dim hallway with Nomsa's voice echoing softly from beyond the corner, Bongani realized something unsettling. He did not know. He stepped back quietly, before Nomsa could see him. Not out of fear, but out of instinct. A man like Bongani understood timing. He understood that confronting something too early could destroy the chance to understand it fully. So he returned to his room, without making a sound, but sleep did not come. Instead, he lay awake, staring into the darkness, replaying every small detail he had ignored over the past weeks. The late-night calls, the moments of distraction, the faint shadows in her expression that he had dismissed as exhaustion. He turned onto his side and closed his eyes. Nomsa had not harmed Lerato. That fact stood firm, But something was pressing in from outside their carefully controlled world, and Nomsa was standing at the center of it. By morning, Bongani had made a decision. He would not accuse. He would observe. The next few days unfolded with a strange tension that no one openly acknowledged. On the surface, everything remained the same. Lerato laughed. Meals were prepared. The house functioned smoothly. But beneath that, Bongani's attention sharpened. He began to notice patterns. Nomsa's phone was always within reach, but never used in front of others unless necessary. When it did ring unexpectedly, she would silence it quickly, her expression tightening for just a fraction of a second before she recovered. She avoided certain areas of the house when others were present, particularly near the main entrance cameras. And once Bongani noticed something that stayed with him longer than anything else. She checked the locks, not casually, not like someone making sure the house was secure, but like someone measuring time, counting, waiting. Still, there was another side of her that refused to fit into suspicion. The way she cared for Lerato had not changed. If anything, it had deepened. She braided the child's hair each morning with a tenderness that felt almost maternal. She corrected her gently when she mispronounced words, praising her softly when she tried again. She listened, really listened to the endless small stories children tell when they feel safe. And Lerato responded, in the only way children know how, with complete trust. "Nomsa says I can learn to cook," she told Bongani one afternoon, her eyes bright with excitement. "Is that so?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Mama used to cook with you." Bongani paused. The mention of Zanele always landed differently. "That's true," he said quietly. "I want to learn too," Lerato continued, "so I can make food for you." Something tightened in Bongani's chest. That would make me very happy. Across the room, Nomsa stood still for a moment, longer than necessary. Her eyes lowered. There it was again, that shadow. By the end of the week, the pressure on Nomsa's side began to show more clearly. It came in the form of silence, not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind. One evening after putting Lerato to bed, Nomsa remained sitting beside her longer than usual. The child had already fallen asleep, her breathing soft and even her small hand still clutching Nomsa's sleeve. Nomsa did not move. Her eyes rested on the child's face, tracing every small detail, the curve of her cheek, the faint scar on her knee, from a fall, days earlier, the way her lips moved slightly, even in sleep. There was something almost desperate in the way she looked at her, as if trying to memorize her. Finally, gently, she slipped her sleeve free and stood. She stepped out into the hallway, closing the door softly behind her. The house was quiet, too quiet. Her phone vibrated in her hand before it even rang. She stared at the screen. No name, just a number she already knew. Her fingers trembled slightly before she answered. "Yes," she whispered. There was no greeting on the other end. Only a voice low-controlled, dangerous in its calmness. "You're running out of time, Nomsa." Her breath caught. "I told you," she said quickly, her voice barely steady. "I need more time. You've had time. I can't just—" "You can," the voice cut in sharply. "And you will." Nomsa pressed her free hand against the wall to steady herself. "She's just a child," she whispered. There was a pause, then a cold response. "That child is worth more than everything you've ever seen in your life." Nomsa's eyes closed. "I know." "Then stop pretending you don't understand what needs to happen." Her voice broke. "I can't hurt her." "You don't have to hurt her," the voice replied. "You just have to deliver her." The words hit like a physical blow. Nomsa shook her head even though the man could not see her. "No. Listen carefully," he continued. "We're not asking again. You bring the girl. You walk away with enough money to fix your life, your mother's hospital bills, your brother's debts. You disappear clean. And if I don't..." The silence that followed was heavier than any threat. Then we come collect in another way. Nomsa's body went cold. Images flashed through her mind, her mother lying weak in a hospital bed, machines beeping steadily beside her. Her younger brother already entangled in dangerous company, trying and failing to escape debts he could not pay. "They know where you're from," the voice added quietly. "They know everything." Nomsa's grip tightened on the phone. "Please," she whispered, "just give me more time. You have until tomorrow night." The line went dead. For a long moment, Nomsa stood there unable to move. The world around her, the polished floors, the quiet walls, the security systems, the wealth felt like a different reality entirely, because none of it could protect her from what was coming. Slowly, she lowered the phone. Her breathing became uneven. Her thoughts began to race. Tomorrow night. Not days, not weeks. Tomorrow. She turned her head and looked at Lorato's closed bedroom door. Behind that door was innocence, trust, a child who had begun to call her mama without hesitation. Nomsa took a step toward the door, then stopped. Her entire body trembled, because for the first time, the choice in front of her was no longer distant. It was immediate, and there was no version of it that did not destroy something. Either she betrayed the child who trusted her, or she risked losing everything she had left of her own family. Tears filled her eyes, but she did not let them fall, because there was no time for weakness, only decisions. And outside, beyond the walls of Bongani's guarded mansion, something was already moving closer. Morning came too quickly. For Bongani, it arrived like any other day, measured, structured, filled with obligations waiting in neat rows. But for Nomsa, it felt like a countdown had already begun. She barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw two futures standing in front of her, both dark, both unforgiving. In one, she followed Sibusiso's orders. She took Lorato, handed her over, and walked away with money that could save her family, but at the cost of a child's safety and her own soul. In the other, she refused, and in that version she did not know what would come, but she knew it would not be gentle. Still, when the first light filtered through the curtains, Nomsa did what she had always done. She got up. She worked, because sometimes routine is the only thing that keeps a breaking heart from collapsing. She entered the kitchen before anyone else, preparing breakfast with careful precision. Eggs, toast, fresh fruit, simple, balanced, familiar. Her hands moved automatically, but her mind was far away. When Lorato walked in, still half sleepy, dragging Captain the Rabbit behind her, Nomsa turned immediately, her face softening as if nothing inside her was fractured. "Good morning, little star," she said gently. Lorato rubbed her eyes. "Good morning, Mama Nomsa." The words hit differently now. Not warm, not comforting, heavy. Nomsa forced a small smile. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes," Lorato nodded. "I dreamed about Mama." Nomsa's chest tightened. "What was she doing in your dream?" "She was singing," Lorato said simply. "And she told me not to be scared." Nomsa froze for half a second. Then she turned back to the stove. "That sounds like something she would say." Lorato climbed onto the chair at the table, swinging her legs gently. "Will you stay with me today?" she asked. "I always stay with you," Nomsa replied automatically. "No," Lorato said, shaking her head slightly. "I mean, really stay." Nomsa looked at her. Children did not always understand the full meaning of their own words, but sometimes they felt more than adults realized. "I will," Nomsa said quietly. Across the room, Bongani stood unnoticed for a moment. He had entered without announcing himself, as he often did, when observing quietly. But today, something in the air made him pause. He watched the interaction, listened. There was nothing overtly wrong. And yet something in Nomsa's voice had changed. It was still gentle, still caring, but there was a strain beneath it now, like a note slightly off in a familiar song. Bongani stepped forward. "Good morning," he said. Lirato's face lit up immediately. "Papa." She jumped off the chair and ran toward him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Bongani held her, resting his hand on her head for a moment longer than usual. "Good morning, my girl," he murmured. Then his eyes lifted. Meeting Nomsa's. For a brief second, something passed between them. Unspoken, unresolved. Nomsa lowered her gaze first. "Breakfast is ready," she said. The rest of the morning moved forward as expected. But Bongani's attention did not leave her. He noticed how she avoided holding eye contact for too long, how her movements were slightly quicker as if time was pressing against her, how she checked the clock not obsessively, but enough to matter. By midday, the tension had become something Bongani could no longer ignore. He found her alone in the kitchen. "Nomsa," he said calmly. She turned immediately. "Yes, sir." He studied her face. "You seem distracted today." Her expression tightened, then smoothed over. "I'm fine," she replied. Bongani did not move. "Are you sure?" "Yes." A pause. Then more softly, "It's just my family." There it was, a partial truth. Bongani nodded slightly. "Is there a problem?" Nomsa hesitated. Everything inside her screamed to say nothing. But something else, something fragile, pushed forward. "My mother is sick," she said quietly. "The hospital bills are difficult." Bongani's expression softened just slightly. "You should have told me. I didn't want to cause trouble." "You're not causing trouble," he replied. "You're part of this household now." The words landed heavily. "Part of this household." Nomsa swallowed. "Thank you, sir." Bongani held her gaze for a moment longer, then spoke again. "If you need help, you ask. Don't carry everything alone." Nomsa nodded. But inside, she knew there were things no one could help her with. Because some problems did not come with solutions, only consequences. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Lirato refused to let Nomsa out of her sight. "Stay," she insisted, tugging on her hand. "Don't go anywhere. I'm not going anywhere," Nomsa assured her. "Promise, I promise." They spent the afternoon in the garden again, but this time the laughter was softer, more fragile. Nomsa watched Lirato, closely memorizing everything: the way she ran, the way she spoke, the way she smiled when she thought no one was looking. Because deep down, a part of her feared this might be the last normal day. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in warm gold and fading orange, Nomsa stood still, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Tomorrow night. The words echoed again. A deadline, a decision, a point of no return. Behind her, Lirato's voice broke the silence. "Nomsa, yes. Are you sad?" Nomsa turned slowly. "Why do you ask?" "Because your eyes look like when people want to cry, but don't." Nomsa felt something inside her break slightly. Children saw too much. She knelt down in front of Lirato, placing her hands gently on the child's shoulders. "I'm okay," she said softly. Lirato studied her face. Then, without warning, she stepped forward and hugged her tightly. "I love you," she said. Nomsa closed her eyes. And for the first time since the phone call, a tear slipped free. Because love, real love, did not make choices easier, it made them impossible. And somewhere far beyond the walls of the mansion, the people waiting for her answer were already preparing for what would happen next. By the time night settled over Johannesburg, the air around Bongani's mansion felt heavier than usual, like a storm gathering without wind, without thunder, without warning. Inside, everything still looked calm. Dinner had been served. Lirato had been bathed, her hair gently braided by Nomsa's steady hands. Her laughter had echoed faintly through the hallway one last time, before sleep slowly claimed her. But beneath that calm surface, something had already begun to fracture. Nomsa stood beside Lorato's bed, long after the child had fallen asleep. The room was dim lit, only by a small night lamp that cast soft shadows across the walls. Captain the rabbit lay tucked under Lorato's arm, her breathing slow and even completely unaware of the storm forming just outside her world. Nomsa didn't move. She just stood there watching. Her eyes traced every detail of the child's face, the curve of her lashes, the softness of her cheeks, the quiet innocence in the way her lips parted slightly as she slept. Tomorrow night. The words no longer echoed. They pressed. They demanded. Nomsa reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair away from Lorato's face. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she did not yet know which version of the future she was apologizing for. Then her phone vibrated. Sharp, sudden, unforgiving. Her body tensed instantly. She stepped back, glancing once more at Lorato, before turning and slipping quietly out of the room, closing the door behind her with care. The hallway felt colder, the silence deeper. She answered without checking the screen. "Yes, you're quiet tonight," Sibusiso's voice said on the other end, smooth but edged with something dangerous. Nomsa swallowed. "I'm thinking." "That's good," he replied. "You should be." A pause. "Then because time is over." Nomsa pressed her hand against the wall, steadying herself. "I told you." "No," he cut in sharply. "You told me stories. You told me delays. What you didn't do was act." Her breathing grew uneven. "I need more." "You don't need more time," he said. "You need courage." Nomsa closed her eyes. "I won't hurt her." Another silence, longer this time, then a low chuckle. "You still don't understand, do you?" "I understand enough," she whispered. "No," he said. "You understand nothing." His tone shifted colder now. "We're not asking you to hurt the child. We're asking you to bring her." Nomsa's grip tightened on the phone, and then what she demanded, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. "You don't need to worry about that." "I do," she said quickly. "Because once I hand her over, you walk away," he interrupted. "With money, with freedom, with your mother alive, with your brother out of trouble." Her chest rose and fell rapidly. "And if I don't?" The silence that followed felt like the world itself had paused. Then we collect. In other ways. Her body went cold. Images filled her mind again, her mother's weak form in the hospital, her brother's desperate eyes, the fragile life she was trying to hold, together with nothing but hope and exhaustion. "They're already watching," Sibusiso added quietly. "You think that house can protect you. You think money stops people like us." Nomsa's voice broke. "Please." "Tomorrow night," he said. "You open the back gate. No guards, no cameras. You bring the girl." Her breath caught. "I can't." "You can," he said firmly. "Or we choose for you." The line went dead. Nomsa stood frozen. The phone slipped slightly in her hand. But she didn't notice. Because for the first time, there was no more illusion of choice. There was only time running out. Behind her, a soft voice broke through the silence. "Nomsa." She turned sharply. Lorato stood at the end of the hallway, rubbing her eyes, her small figure wrapped in a thin blanket. Nomsa's heart dropped. "What are you doing up?" she asked quickly, forcing her voice back to calm. "I couldn't sleep," Lorato said softly. "I didn't see you." Nomsa stepped toward her, immediately kneeling down. "I was just here." Lorato studied her face. "You look scared." Nomsa shook her head gently. "I'm not." "Yes, you are," Lorato insisted. "Your eyes are like when I had a bad dream." Nomsa felt something inside her crack again. She pulled Lorato into a soft embrace. "I'm okay," she whispered. Lorato hugged her back tightly. "Don't go," the child said. "Stay with me." Nomsa closed her eyes. "I will." She lifted Lorato into her arms and carried her back to bed. That night she didn't leave. She lay beside the child, staring into the darkness, long after Lorato had fallen asleep again. And in that silence, she made a decision. Not a complete one. Not yet. But something inside her shifted. Because there was one truth she could no longer escape. She could not hand that child over, no matter the cost. Morning came with a strange stillness. Nomsa moved through the house as usual, but something about her had changed. Not outwardly, but inside. The fear was still there, the pressure, the countdown. But now there was something else alongside it. Resolve, fragile, uncertain, but real. Bongani noticed it immediately. He found her in the kitchen again, preparing breakfast. "You didn't sleep," he said quietly. Nomsa froze for a second, then resumed her movement. "I'm fine." Bongani stepped closer. "No," he said. "You're not." She didn't respond. "Nomsa!" He continued, his tone firmer now. "If something is happening, you need to tell me." She turned to face him. For a moment, it looked like she might speak, like the truth might finally come out. But then "It's nothing," she said. The words fell flat. Bongani studied her carefully. He knew that tone. It was the tone people used when they were hiding something they believed could not be fixed. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said. But in his mind, something shifted, because now doubt was no longer a whisper. It was a presence. And outside, beyond the walls, unseen by anyone inside, a black car had already parked far enough to avoid attention. Watching. Waiting. Because tomorrow night was no longer a possibility. It was a plan, already in motion. By the time the next evening approached, the mansion no longer felt like a place of comfort to Nomsa. It felt like a countdown. Every clock tick echoed louder. Every movement felt measured. Every breath carried weight. Tomorrow night had become tonight, and there was no more time to delay. All day, Nomsa moved like someone walking a thin line between two cliffs. She performed every task exactly as expected, preparing meals, guiding Lorato through her lessons, brushing her hair, listening to her endless small stories. To anyone watching, nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. Because now every moment felt like it might be the last normal one. She memorized everything. The sound of Lorato's laughter when she tripped over her own feet while playing. The way she wrinkled her nose when she didn't like vegetables. The soft hum she made when she drew pictures on the living room floor. Even the silence felt important. Because Nomsa knew by this time tomorrow, everything could be gone. By late afternoon, the sky darkened slightly, clouds stretching thin across the horizon. Not enough for rain, but enough to dim the light. Enough to make the world feel quieter. Inside, Bongani sat in his study, but he wasn't working. The files in front of him remained untouched. His thoughts were elsewhere. On Nomsa. On the tension he could no longer ignore. On the feeling that something was approaching and that he was standing just outside of understanding it. He had made a decision earlier that day. He had instructed his private security team quietly to increase monitoring around the property. No alarms, no visible changes, just awareness. Because whatever was happening, Bongani was no longer willing to stand still and wait for it to reveal itself on its own. Meanwhile, in the nursery wing, Nomsa was facing a different kind of preparation. Lorato sat on the floor, surrounded by her toys, speaking softly to Captain the Rabbit, as if the stuffed animal could understand everything. Nomsa stood by the window, staring out at the back of the property. The gate. That was where it would happen. Sibusiso's voice replayed in her mind. "You open the back gate. No guards, no cameras." Her stomach tightened. She knew the layout of the security system now. She knew the blind spots, the moments when patrols shifted, the exact timing of the guards at the rear entrance. She had learned it all, not with bad intentions, but now that knowledge had become a weapon. Behind her, Larato's voice broke through her thoughts. Nomsa. She turned. Yes, come play. Nomsa hesitated. Just for a second. Then she forced herself to move forward, kneeling down beside her. What are we playing? A family, Larato said simply. Nomsa's heart twisted. Oh yes, Larato continued arranging the toys carefully. This one is you. This one is me. And this one, she held up another small figure, is Papa. Nomsa smiled faintly. And what are we doing? We're staying together, Larato said. The words landed softly, but they carried more weight than the child understood. Nomsa swallowed. That sounds like a good game. Larato nodded proudly. It's not a game, she said. It's real. Nomsa looked at her, and in that moment, something inside her made a final decision. Not based on fear, not based on pressure, but based on something much simpler. She could not break this child, no matter what it cost her. As night fell, the house settled into its usual routine. Dinner, bath, bedtime. But tonight, everything felt sharper, more defined, like the world was holding its breath. After tucking Larato into bed, Nomsa lingered again. But this time her stillness was different. It wasn't hesitation. It was resolve. She leaned down and kissed Larato's forehead. I'm here, she whispered. Then she stood and stepped out into the hallway. The moment had come. She walked slowly toward the back of the house, her footsteps almost silent against the polished floor. Every second stretched. Every shadow seemed deeper. When she reached the security panel near the rear corridor, she paused. Her hand hovered over it. This was the point, the line. Once crossed, there would be no going back. Her heart pounded. Her breathing quickened. Sibusiso's voice echoed again. You open the gate! Nomsa closed her eyes, and then she pressed the panel, not to disable it, but to check it. Still active, still secure. Her hand trembled slightly. Then she stepped away. No, she whispered. She turned and froze. Bongani stood at the end of the corridor, watching her, silently. His presence was sudden but not chaotic. Still, controlled. But his eyes saw everything. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them tightened. What are you doing here? Bongani asked quietly. Nomsa's mind raced. Think, say something. I was just checking the back security panel, he interrupted. His tone was not loud, but it was firm, precise. Nomsa swallowed. I heard a noise, she said. Bongani stepped closer, slowly. Did you? Their eyes locked, and in that moment something shifted irreversibly, because Bongani no longer saw just the woman who cared for his daughter. He saw the tension, the fear, the lie, and Nomsa saw that he knew, not everything, but enough. Silence stretched between them, heavy, dangerous. What's going on? Nomsa Bongani asked. The question was simple, but it carried weight, because now this was no longer just her burden. It was beginning to become his. And somewhere beyond the walls of the mansion, the people waiting in the darkness were already moving into position, because whether Nomsa obeyed or not, tonight something was going to happen. For a moment, time did not move. Bongani stood in the dimly lit corridor, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the polished floor. Nomsa stood several steps away from the security panel, her hand still trembling slightly at her side. Between them hung a silence so heavy it felt like something physical, something that could break if either of them spoke the wrong word. What's going on, Nomsa? His voice was calm, too calm. That kind of calm did not come from ignorance. It came from control. Nomsa opened her mouth, but no words came out. Because in that moment she understood something clearly. There was no safe answer. If she told the truth, she would bring danger into the house. If she lied, she would deepen the suspicion, already growing in Bongani's eyes. And Bongani was not a man who ignored suspicion. She started, then stopped. Bongani took another step forward. "Look at me." She did, reluctantly. His gaze was sharp-focused, searching, not angry yet, but dangerously close to it. "You said you heard a noise," he continued. "What kind of noise?" Nomsa's throat tightened. "I thought, maybe something outside." "And you decided to check the security system yourself?" Bongani asked. There was no accusation in his tone, but there was something worse, doubt turning into certainty. Nomsa's chest rose and fell unevenly. "I didn't want to disturb anyone," she said. Bongani held her gaze for a long second. Then, "That's not your job." The words landed quietly, but they drew a line. Nomsa lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry." Another silence. Then Bongani exhaled slowly, his hand brushing briefly against his jaw, as if steadying his thoughts. "Something is wrong," he said finally, "and you're in the middle of it." Nomsa's breath caught. "No, don't." He interrupted, not raising his voice but sharpening it just enough. "Don't lie to me again." The corridor seemed to shrink around them. Nomsa felt her pulse in her ears. "I'm not—" "You are," he said. A pause. Then more quietly, "And you're scared." That word hit her harder than anything else, because it was true, and he saw it. Nomsa's eyes filled, but she blinked quickly, forcing the tears back. "I can't tell you," she whispered. Bongani's expression changed. Not anger, not yet. Something else, something colder. "Why not?" "Because," her voice broke slightly, "because it will make things worse." "For who?" he asked. She didn't answer. "For you," Bongani pressed. "Still nothing. For my daughter." That made her flinch, and Bongani saw it. Everything inside him sharpened instantly. "What does this have to do with Lerato?" he demanded, stepping closer. Nomsa shook her head quickly. "Nothing. I would never." "Then tell me." "I can't." The words came out louder than she intended. The echo lingered in the corridor. Both of them froze. From down the hallway, a small voice broke through the tension. "Papa." They turned. Lerato stood at the edge of the corridor again, clutching her rabbit, her eyes wide with confusion. "I heard voices," she said softly. Bongani moved immediately, his expression softening as he approached her. "It's okay," he said gently. "You should be in bed." She looked past him, at Nomsa. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Nomsa forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "Go back to sleep." Lerato hesitated, then nodded slowly. But before she turned away, she stepped forward and took Nomsa's hand for a brief second. A silent gesture. Trust. Then she walked back to her room. The moment she disappeared, the air shifted again. Bongani straightened slowly. His patience had reached its limit. "You're going to tell me what's happening," he said. It wasn't a request anymore. Nomsa shook her head, stepping back slightly. "I can't." Bongani's jaw tightened. "You don't have a choice." "I do," she said, her voice shaking but firm. And that changed something, because now this was no longer just suspicion. It was resistance. Bongani took a step closer. "You're in my house," he said quietly. "You're responsible for my child." "If there's a threat, there is," she said suddenly. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Silence. Bongani froze. What Nomsa closed her eyes. "Too late. There is a threat," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Bongani's entire posture shifted, from suspicion to readiness. "Explain." Nomsa shook her head, tears finally spilling over. "I can't. You just said there's a threat." Bongani snapped, his control breaking slightly. "To who?" She didn't answer. "To Lerato," he demanded. Nomsa looked at him. And that was enough. Bongani's blood ran cold. "What have you done?" he asked, his voice dropping dangerously. "Nothing," she cried. "I haven't done anything." "Then why is my daughter in danger?" Nomsa's hands trembled violently now. "Because of me." The words hung in the air. Bongani stared at her. "What does that mean?" She swallowed hard. "They came to me," she said. "They forced me." Nomsa hesitated. Fear flickered across her face again. "They're watching," she whispered. Bongani's eyes darkened. "From where?" She shook her head. "I don't know." He took out his phone immediately, his tone shifting into something colder, more controlled. "I'm calling security." "No!" Nomsa stepped forward quickly, grabbing his wrist before she could stop herself. The contact shocked both of them. "You can't," she said urgently. "If you do, they'll what Bongani demanded." Nomsa's voice broke. "They'll hurt my family." Silence. Bongani looked at her. Really looked, and for the first time he saw the full picture. Not just fear, desperation. "They're using you," he said quietly. Nomsa nodded, tears falling freely now. "They want Lerato." The world seemed to stop. Bongani's grip on his phone tightened. "What did you just say?" Nomsa's voice trembled. "They told me to open the back gate tonight." Bongani's heart slammed against his chest. "And if you didn't," she met his eyes, "they said they'd take everything from me." A long, heavy silence followed. Then Bongani did something unexpected. He didn't shout, he didn't explode. He became still, dangerously still, because now this was no longer about suspicion, or doubt, or trust. This was war. "They chose the wrong house," he said quietly. Nomsa stared at him, her breath unsteady. "You don't understand." "No," Bongani interrupted, his voice low and controlled. "They don't understand." He turned, already dialing. This time he didn't hesitate. Because whoever was coming, they weren't walking into a helpless home. They were walking into something they hadn't prepared for. And tonight, everything was about to collide. The house did not erupt into chaos. It transformed, quietly, efficiently, completely. Within minutes of Bongani's call, the rhythm of the mansion shifted into something precise and controlled. Not a single alarm sounded. No lights flashed. No guards ran through the halls. From the outside, everything remained calm, almost eerily so. But inside, every corner was awake. Men moved into position without being seen. Cameras adjusted angles. Access points were locked down and monitored with new intensity. The back gate, once just another part of the estate, became the center of a silent operation. Bongani stood in the main control room. Now his expression hard-focused, stripped of anything resembling hesitation. Nomsa stood a few steps behind him, her hands clasped tightly together. She had never seen this side of him before. This was not the man who sat quietly at dinner, listening to his daughter speak about small things. This was the man people whispered about, the one who did not lose, the one who did not forgive threats. "You said they wanted the back gate opened," Bongani said. Without turning, Nomsa nodded. "Yes, what time tonight?" "They didn't say exactly, but it will be late." Bongani glanced at one of the security monitors, his mind already moving ahead. "They'll come when they think we're weakest," he said. "When the house is asleep." Nomsa swallowed. "They're dangerous." "So am I," Bongani replied calmly. That ended the conversation. Orders were given. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with absolute clarity. Outer perimeter tighten surveillance. Rear gate keep it appearing normal. No confrontation until I say. And no one touches my daughter. The last sentence carried weight, the kind that did not need to be repeated. As night deepened, the house dimmed into its usual quiet. Lights turned off, doors closed. The illusion of sleep settled in. Only a few knew the truth. Nomsa remained near the control room, unable to leave, unable to rest. Her eyes moved constantly from the screens to the hallway to Bongani. "Should I stay with Lorato?" she asked softly. Bongani didn't look at her. "Yes." She hesitated. "You trust me?" she asked before she could stop herself. That made him pause. For the first time since everything had been revealed, Bongani turned and looked at her fully. "I trust what you chose," he said. Nomsa's breath caught, because he didn't say he trusted her completely. But he didn't reject her either, and right now that was enough. She nodded and left quickly, her steps carrying her back toward the nursery wing. Inside Lorato's room, everything was peaceful. Too peaceful. The child slept quietly, her breathing soft, her small hand still wrapped around Captain. Nomsa sat beside her again, waiting, listening. Every second stretched, every sound felt amplified. And then it happened. A flicker on the monitor. Back in the control room, one of the guards leaned forward slightly. "Movement at the outer perimeter," he said. Bongani didn't react immediately. "Show me." The screen zoomed. A shadow, then another. Figures moving carefully, deliberately, staying just outside the reach of the main lights. "They're here," the guard said. Bongani's eyes narrowed. "Let them come closer." In the nursery, Nomsa felt it before she heard anything. A shift in the air, a presence. Her body tensed instantly. She stood moving quietly to the window. Nothing. But something felt wrong. Back in the control room, the figures approached the rear gate. One of them stepped forward, checked something. Then the gate clicked, unlocked. Bongani's eyes sharpened. "They expected it to open," he said. Nomsa's earlier knowledge, her access, that was their plan. "They think you're still working for them," one of the guards muttered. Bongani didn't respond. He was already thinking ahead. "Let them enter." The words were calm, but dangerous. The gate opened slowly. 3 men slipped inside, dressed in dark clothing, moving with purpose. No hesitation, no fear, because they believed the house was vulnerable. Inside the nursery, Nomsa's heart pounded violently now. She turned back to Lorato, still asleep, still unaware. Nomsa moved quickly, gently shaking her. "Lorato," she whispered. "Wake up." The child stirred slightly. "Nomsa, we have to go somewhere, okay?" Quietly. Lorato blinked, confused but trusting. "Okay." Nomsa lifted her into her arms, holding her tightly. "I'm right here," she whispered. Back in the control room, they're moving toward the main hall, a guard reported. Bongani's jaw tightened. "They're not even searching," he said. "They know exactly where to go." That meant one thing. They had information. Accurate information. They're heading straight for the nursery wing. The room went still. Bongani didn't move, but something inside him shifted. Cold, precise. "Positions," he said quietly. The guards moved instantly, silent, invisible. In the hallway leading to the nursery, the intruders advanced. One of them raised a hand, stopped, listened, then nodded. "Inside," he whispered. They reached the door, slowly. Carefully they pushed it open, and froze. The bed was empty, the room was still, but the child gone. What before he could finish. Lights snapped on, from every angle. Footsteps, fast, controlled, surrounding. The men turned too late. Weapons were raised, not fired, but ready. "Don't move," a voice commanded. Bongani stepped into the doorway, calm, unshaken, untouchable. "You picked the wrong house," he said. The men froze. One of them tried to step back, but there was nowhere to go. They were surrounded. Completely. The illusion had worked. Perfectly. And somewhere just beyond the hallway, Nomsa stood in the shadows, holding Lorato tightly against her chest. Trembling, but safe. For now. because the night was not over yet, and Bongani knew. This was only the beginning. For a brief moment, victory seemed certain. The three intruders stood frozen in the nursery doorway, surrounded by Bongani's security team. Their confidence had evaporated, replaced by the cold realization that they had walked directly into a trap. But men like that did not surrender easily. One of them laughed, not loudly, not nervously, but with a strange calm that didn't belong to someone cornered. "You think this is over," he said. Bongani didn't blink. "Yes," he replied. "It is." The man tilted his head, slightly studying him. "No," he said. "You just stepped into it." Before Bongani could respond, a voice crackled through the intruder's earpiece. Now, everything changed in that second. A sharp sound echoed from outside. Then another. Back in the control room. Alarms finally triggered. "Sir, secondary breach," one of the guards shouted into his comms. Bongani's head snapped slightly. "Where?" "Front perimeter, multiple vehicles." The intruders in the hallway smiled. "You were watching the wrong door." Bongani's expression hardened instantly. Of course, this had never been about three men. This had been a distraction. "Lock down the main entrance," he ordered sharply. Too late, the voice came back. They're already inside the outer gate. The house that had felt controlled just moments ago now shifted into something far more volatile. A real threat. In the shadows near the stairwell, Nomsa heard it too. The change in sound, the tension rising. Lerato clung to her tightly, her small body trembling now. "What's happening?" the child whispered. Nomsa held her closer. "I've got you," she said softly. "I won't let anything happen." But inside, she was terrified. Because this was worse than she had imagined. Back in the hallway, Bongani didn't raise his voice. He didn't panic, but his mind moved faster now. They had underestimated the situation. Not the danger, but the scale of it. "Split the team," he said quickly. "Half hold these three. The rest move to intercept." The guards responded instantly, precise, disciplined. But even with that, the balance had shifted, from control to confrontation. Outside engines roared, doors slammed, heavy footsteps approached. Inside, the air thickened, because now this was no longer a silent operation. This was a siege. In the main corridor, Bongani stepped forward slightly, his presence commanding. "You made a mistake," he said to the captured men. One of them smirked. "No," he replied. "You did." Bongani's eyes narrowed. "You think this ends with you stopping us here?" The man continued. "You don't even know who you're dealing with." "I don't need to," Bongani said coldly. The man chuckled. "You will." A loud crash echoed from deeper inside the house. A door forced open. Voices, more footsteps. They were in. Bongani turned sharply. "Move." He didn't wait for confirmation. He was already walking, fast, controlled, toward the sound. Because now this wasn't about strategy anymore. This was about his daughter. In the stairwell, Nomsa backed away slowly, holding Lerato close. "Stay quiet," she whispered. Lerato nodded, her face pressed against Nomsa's shoulder. Nomsa's heart pounded violently. Think, move, hide. She turned down a side corridor, one of the less used paths in the house meant for staff access. Her steps were careful, but fast. Behind her, the sounds of movement grew louder, closer, and then footsteps ahead. She froze. Two men appeared at the far end of the corridor. Not the ones from before. Different, bigger, more aggressive. Their eyes locked onto her instantly. "There," one of them said. Nomsa's breath caught. She turned, but there was nowhere to go. One of them stepped forward quickly. "Hand over the child." "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. The man's expression darkened. "You don't understand what you're involved in." "I do," she replied. and I'm not doing it." The second man moved to cut off her path. "Then you're making this harder than it needs to be." Nomsa tightened her grip on Lerato. "Stay behind me," she whispered. The men advanced, slow, confident, because they believed this was inevitable. Nomsa's eyes darted, looking for anything, an escape, a chance, a miracle, and then a voice. "Stop!" All three turned. Bongani stood at the end of the corridor, alone. His presence filled the space, cold, unyielding. The men paused, not out of fear but recognition. "So this is him," one of them said. Bongani's gaze never left them. "You've made enough mistakes for one night." The man smirked. "You think this ends because you showed up? I know it does," Bongani replied. The second man stepped forward. "You're outnumbered." Bongani didn't move. "You're in my house." A beat of silence, then footsteps, behind the intruders. They turned too late. Bongani's security team closed in from both sides, weapons raised, positions locked. The men froze, again. But this time there was no confidence left. No smirks, no control. They were surrounded, completely. Nomsa's knees nearly gave out as the tension broke. Lerato clung to her, crying softly now. "It's okay," Nomsa whispered. "It's okay." Bongani stepped forward slowly. His eyes moved from the men, to Nomsa, to Lerato, and something shifted again. Not just anger, not just control, something deeper. Because he had seen it now. The choice Nomsa made. She could have handed the child over. She didn't, and that changed everything. "Take them," Bongani said quietly. The guards moved immediately, restraining the intruders with precise efficiency. Within seconds it was over. At least here. But Bongani knew better. This wasn't finished. Not yet. Because men like this didn't move alone. And somewhere out there, the one pulling the strings was still watching, still waiting, still calculating. Bongani turned back to Nomsa. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, "You chose," he said. Nomsa nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "I couldn't." I know, he interrupted. Silence, heavy, but different now, not filled with suspicion, but something else. Recognition, respect, and the beginning of something that had not existed before: trust. The house did not return to normal. Not after that. Even when the last intruder was restrained, even when the corridors were cleared, even when the alarms quieted and the guards resumed their controlled positions, something fundamental had changed. Because danger had crossed the threshold, and once that happens, nothing ever feels entirely safe again. In the main hall, the captured men were forced to their knees under the watchful eyes of Bongani's security team. Their earlier confidence had dissolved into silence, replaced by tight jaws and calculating glances. These were not ordinary criminals. They were disciplined, trained, and most importantly, used to operating under orders. Which meant one thing: they were not the ones Bongani needed. Bongani stood in front of them, his presence calm but heavy with authority. "Who sent you?" he asked. No one answered. He waited. Still no response. One of the men looked up at him and smirked faintly. "You think we talk?" he said. Bongani tilted his head, slightly studying him. "No," he replied. "I think you value your lives." That wiped the smirk away. But still they remained silent. Bongani didn't press further. Not yet. Because there were other pieces to understand first. He turned. Nomsa stood a few steps away, still holding Lerato tightly. The child had stopped crying, but her small fingers clung to Nomsa's clothing, as if letting go would bring the danger back. Bongani approached slowly. "Is she hurt?" he asked. Nomsa shook her head. "No." Bongani crouched slightly, bringing himself to Lerato's level. "Lerato," he said gently. The child looked at him, her eyes still wide. "It's over," he continued softly. "You're safe." She nodded slowly. Then without hesitation she reached out. Not to him, but to Nomsa, and wrapped her arms around her again. Bongani saw it, and this time he understood it. Not as distance, not as rejection, but as trust. The kind of trust that is earned in moments of fear. He stood up again, his gaze shifting to Nomsa. "Come with me," he said. Nomsa hesitated, then nodded. She followed him into a quieter room, away from the main hall, carrying Lerato with her. Bongani closed the door behind them, creating a space where the noise of the outside world could not reach. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Bongani turned. "Tell me everything." Nomsa took a breath. This time she didn't hold anything back. "They found me in Soweto." She began, her voice unsteady but clear. "After my brother got into trouble. Debts. People he shouldn't have owed." Bongani listened without interruption. "They knew I was desperate." She continued. "They knew about my mother. The hospital bills. Everything." Her voice trembled slightly. "They offered me money, said all I had to do was get close to your daughter." Bongani's jaw tightened. "And you agreed?" Nomsa nodded slowly. "At first, yes." The admission hung in the air. Heavy, honest. "I thought it would be something small," she said quickly. "Information, schedules." "I didn't know that they wanted to take her," Bongani finished. Nomsa closed her eyes briefly. "They didn't tell me at the beginning. Not everything. When did you find out?" "After I was already here," she said. After she started trusting me." Her voice broke. "I tried to stall. I kept asking for more time. I told them I needed to gain your trust first. But they didn't care. They just kept pushing." Bongani studied her carefully. "And tonight, they gave me a deadline," she whispered. "Open the gate, bring her to them. And you didn't." Nomsa shook her head. "I couldn't." Silence filled the room again. Not tense, not hostile, but weighted with truth. Bongani stepped closer. Why, the question was simple, but important. Nomsa looked down at Lerato, who had now fallen asleep again in her arms, exhausted from fear. "Because she's just a child," she said softly. A pause. Then, "and because she trusted me." Bongani exhaled slowly. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, "You should have told me earlier." Nomsa nodded. "I know. I could have protected you." "I know," she repeated. "But you didn't trust me enough to do that." Nomsa looked at him. "I didn't trust that anyone could fix it," she said honestly. That answer stayed in the room longer than anything else. Because it wasn't an attack. It was a reflection of her world. A world where help rarely came without cost. Bongani nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. And for the first time, he meant it. He turned slightly, walking toward the window, his thoughts moving quickly now. "They're not random," he said. "They had information, timing, access." Nomsa nodded. "They've been watching." Bongani's eyes darkened. "Not just watching," he corrected. "Planning." He turned back. "This wasn't about money." Nomsa frowned slightly. "But they said—" "They always say that," Bongani interrupted. "Money is just the bait." A realization began to form. "These people, they knew who I am," he continued. "They knew what my daughter is worth, not just financially." Nomsa's expression shifted. "You think this is bigger?" Bongani didn't hesitate. "I know it is." The room fell silent again, because now this was no longer just a failed kidnapping. This was something else, something deeper, something more dangerous. Bongani stepped closer again. "You're not leaving this house," he said firmly. Nomsa blinked. "What, you're under my protection now?" Her breath caught. "They'll come after me," she said. "I know," Bongani replied. "They'll come after my family." "I know. They won't stop." Bongani met her eyes. "Neither will I." The words settled heavily, because they were not said with emotion. They were said with certainty. Nomsa felt something shift inside her. Not relief, not yet, but something close to it. Because for the first time since this began, she wasn't facing it alone. Behind her, Lorato stirred slightly, her small hand tightening its grip on Nomsa's clothing, even in sleep. And in that moment, the lines were no longer unclear. There was no more hesitation, no more divided loyalties. Only one truth remained. This house, this child, this family had become something Nomsa was willing to fight for. And Bongani had just made a silent promise to do the same, no matter who was behind it, no matter how far it went. Because the night had revealed something deeper than danger. It had revealed what mattered, and now there was no turning back. The night did not end with the intruders being taken away. It deepened, because once the surface of a threat is broken, what lies beneath rarely stays hidden for long. By the early hours of the morning, Bongani's mansion had transformed into something else, entirely. Not a home, not just a fortress, but a command center. The captured men were gone, removed quietly, taken somewhere they could no longer influence anything inside the house. But Bongani knew removing the hands did not stop the mind behind them, and that mind was still out there, watching, waiting, planning its next move. In his study, Bongani stood alone for a long time. Not working, not speaking, just thinking. The city outside was quiet at that hour. The distant hum of Johannesburg softened into a low, almost peaceful rhythm. But inside his thoughts, nothing was calm. He replayed everything Nomsa had told him. The approach, the pressure, the plan, the timing. This had not been random. This had not been desperation. This had been strategy. Which meant one thing: someone had chosen his daughter, not as an opportunity, but as a target. And Bongani had lived too long in the world of power not to recognize what that meant. This was personal. He turned slowly, his eyes moving to the glass window overlooking the grounds. For years he had built his empire carefully, negotiated hard, won aggressively, and in doing so, he had made enemies. Men who smiled in meetings and plotted in silence, men who lost money because of him, men who lost influence, men who waited. And now one of them had made a move, but they had made one mistake. They had gone after his child. Behind him, a quiet knock broke the silence. "Come in," Bongani said. The door opened. Nomsa stepped in carefully. She looked different now, not because her appearance had changed, but because something inside her had. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled her. "Is she asleep?" Bongani asked. "Yes," Nomsa replied. "She didn't wake again." Bongani nodded. "Good." A brief silence followed. Then Nomsa spoke. "I need to tell you something else." Bongani turned slightly, his attention sharpening. "Go on." Nomsa hesitated for only a moment this time. "They weren't the ones calling me," she said. Bongani's expression darkened. "What do you mean?" "The voice I spoke to. It wasn't any of the men who came here tonight." Bongani's mind moved instantly. "A middle layer," he said. Nomsa nodded. "I never saw him, never met him. Just the calls." "What did he sound like?" "Calm," she said. "Too calm, like someone who wasn't afraid of anything." Bongani exhaled slowly. That matched what he expected. "Did he ever say a name?" he asked. "No. Anything that could identify him." Nomsa shook her head. "He didn't need to. He already knew everything about me. That part mattered, because it meant the man behind this wasn't just powerful. He was informed, connected, dangerous." Bongani walked slowly back toward his desk, his thoughts aligning into something sharper now. "Then we find him," he said. Nomsa looked at him. How Bongani didn't answer immediately. Because the truth was, this wasn't something that would be solved quickly. or easily. This was a different kind of war. One that didn't happen in open spaces, but in shadows, through information, through pressure, through control. "We start with what we have," he said finally. "And what's that?" Bongani's eyes met hers. "You." Nomsa's breath caught. "Me. You're the only one who has direct contact with him." Bongani continued. "Which means you're the only way we can reach him." Fear flickered in her expression again. "You want me to talk to him? I want you to answer when he calls again." And then what? Bongani stepped closer. "We listen." Nomsa swallowed. "He'll know something is wrong. Not if we control the situation." Silence. "Then he's not stupid," she said. "I know," Bongani replied. "Neither am I." Another pause. Nomsa looked down briefly, then back up. "What if he realizes I didn't follow the plan?" "He already will," Bongani said. "But that doesn't mean he'll stop." Nomsa's brow furrowed. "You think he'll try again?" Bongani didn't hesitate. "Yes." The word landed heavily. "Why?" she asked. "Because people like that don't walk away from something they've already invested in," Bongani said. "Not without trying to regain control." Nomsa's heart tightened. "So this isn't over." "No," Bongani said quietly. "It's just begun." The room fell silent again. But this time it wasn't uncertainty filling the space. It was preparation. Because now both of them understood the truth. This wasn't about one night or one attempt. This was something larger, something deeper, and something that would not stop unless it was stopped. Nomsa took a slow breath. "I'll do it," she said. Bongani looked at her. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I started this," she said, "even if I didn't know what it would become." A pause. "Now I finish it." Bongani studied her for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "All right." The decision was made, and with it, the balance shifted again, because now they were no longer reacting. They were moving forward, together. Outside, the first light of dawn began to rise slowly over the city. Soft, golden, almost peaceful. But inside that house, peace was no longer the goal. Control was. And somewhere far beyond their reach for now. The man behind everything would soon realize something he hadn't expected. His plan had failed, his control had been broken, and the people he thought were weak were now ready to fight back. Morning did not bring relief. It brought clarity. The kind that comes after fear has already shown its face when there is no longer any illusion left to hide behind. In Bongani's house, everything looked calm again. The floors were polished. The staff moved with their usual quiet discipline. Breakfast was served at the exact same time. But beneath that calm, every person who mattered understood. Nothing was normal anymore. In the control room, new systems had already been activated. Layers of surveillance that had once been optional were now constant. The security team rotated in tighter shifts. No movement went untracked. No call went unrecorded. Bongani stood at the center of it all. Still, focused, dangerously precise. Because now he wasn't waiting for the next move. He was preparing for it. Nomsa sat nearby, her phone placed on the table in front of her. It hadn't rung yet, but both of them knew it would. Men like Sibusiso did not disappear after failure. They adapted, they recalculated, and then they returned. Hours passed, slow, heavy. Then the phone vibrated. Both of them froze. Nomsa's breath caught in her chest as she stared at the screen. Unknown number. Again. Bongani stepped closer. "Answer it," he said quietly. Nomsa's fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up. For a brief second she closed her eyes. Then she answered. "Yes." Silence. Then a voice. Calm, controlled, familiar. "I was beginning to think you had lost your courage." Nomsa's throat tightened. "I couldn't do it." A soft chuckle echoed through the line. "Yes," the voice said. I noticed. Bongani stood just beside her, listening carefully, every word registering, every tone analyzed. You sent men, Nomsa continued, her voice steadier now. They failed. They weren't meant to succeed, the voice replied casually. That made Bongani's eyes narrow. Of course, a test or a distraction. Then what was the point? Nomsa asked. To see, the voice said, what kind of person you really are. Nomsa's grip tightened on the phone. And now you know. Yes, he said. Now I know you're inconvenient. The word landed cold. Nomsa swallowed. You threatened my family. And I still can, he replied calmly. A pause. Then but I prefer not to waste assets. Nomsa's eyes flickered slightly. What does that mean? It means, the voice continued. You still have value to me. Bongani stepped closer, his focus sharpening. Put him on speaker, he whispered. Nomsa hesitated, then obeyed. The voice filled the room now, clear, unfiltered. You failed your task, the man continued. But failure doesn't always mean the end. Nomsa forced herself to speak. I'm not working for you anymore. Another pause. Then, you never worked for me, the voice corrected. You survived because of me. Bongani's expression hardened. Listen carefully, Nomsa said, her voice shaking but determined. Stay away from that child. Silence. Then, you think you're in a position to give orders? Before Nomsa could respond, Bongani stepped forward. No, he said calmly. But I am. The line went quiet. For the first time, a break in control. Who is this? The voice asked. Bongani didn't hesitate. You already know. A longer silence followed, then a slow exhale. Bongani, recognition, confirmed. You've made a mistake. Bongani continued. A very expensive one. The voice on the other end shifted slightly. Not afraid, but more cautious now. You think this is over? He asked. I know it is, Bongani replied. A faint laugh. You caught a few men, the voice said. That doesn't stop anything. No, Bongani agreed. But it tells me something. And what is that you're close enough to think you can reach into my home? Silence. Then you built your empire, stepping on people. The voice said coldly. Did you think none of them would remember? Bongani's eyes darkened. Ah, he said quietly. So this is personal. Everything is personal, the voice replied. Nomsa watched the exchange, her heart pounding. Because now this wasn't just about her anymore. This was something far bigger. Let me make this simple, Bongani said, his tone calm but sharp as steel. You come near my daughter again, and I don't stop at your men. The threat wasn't loud, but it was absolute. The voice on the other end paused. Then, and what makes you think you can find me? Bongani's expression didn't change. Because you made contact, he said. And that was your mistake. A beat of silence. Then we'll see. The line went dead. The room fell still. Nomsa lowered the phone slowly, her hands trembling slightly. It's him, she whispered. Bongani nodded. Yes. But his focus wasn't on the call anymore. It was on what came next. Track it, he said sharply to the security team. They're already working on it, one of them replied. Bongani turned his mind, moving fast now. Because this was the opening, the first real step toward finding the man behind everything. Nomsa looked at him. What happens now? Bongani didn't hesitate. Now, he said, we end it. The words settled into the room with weight, because they weren't said in anger. They were said in certainty. Outside, the sun had fully risen. The city was alive again, but inside that house, something else had awakened. Not fear, not doubt, but resolve, because Bongani had crossed into a place he rarely allowed himself to go, personal war. And when a man like him fought for something he loved, he didn't lose, he didn't stop, and he didn't forgive. War, when it becomes personal, changes everything. For Bongani, It stripped away the final layer of distance he had always maintained between his world of power and his world of family. For years, he had believed he could keep those two lives separate, one built on strategy, competition, and calculated risk. The other meant to be protected, untouched by the consequences of his choices. He had been wrong, and now he would correct it. The call had given him what he needed, not a name, not a location, but something far more valuable, a connection. Within hours, Bongani's network was already in motion. Private intelligence teams were activated. Old contacts once used only in business negotiations were called upon for something very different. Information began to move through channels that did not appear on any official record, quiet inquiries, subtle pressure, hidden surveillance. Because finding a man like that did not require noise. It required reach. And Bongani had plenty of it. By midday, the first thread appeared. The number used in the call was not random. It had been masked, rerouted through multiple layers designed to disappear. But nothing truly vanished, not completely. Not from someone who knew where to look. It bounced through 3 different networks, one of the analysts reported. But the origin, we're narrowing it down. Bongani stood behind them watching the screen. Where? Still confirming, the man replied. But it's local, Johannesburg. That confirmed what Bongani already suspected. This wasn't someone watching from a distance. This was someone close enough to observe, close enough to plan, close enough to feel confident. And that was a mistake. Keep going, Bongani said. Meanwhile, in the quieter part of the house, Nomsa sat beside Lerato, brushing her hair slowly. The child had returned to her usual self, laughing again, asking questions, moving through the world, as if the fear of the previous night had already begun to fade. Children had that gift. They healed faster than adults. But Nomsa did not. Every sound still made her tense slightly. Every shadow felt like it could hold something unseen. "Are you okay?" Lerato asked suddenly. Nomsa paused. "Yes," she said softly. "You don't look okay." Nomsa smiled faintly. "I'm just thinking." About what? Nomsa hesitated. "Then about how strong you are." Lerato tilted her head. "I was scared. Being scared doesn't mean you're not strong," Nomsa replied gently. Lerato considered that, then nodded. "Then you're strong, too," she said. The words were simple, but they stayed with Nomsa longer than anything else that day, because for the first time she began to believe it. By late afternoon, Bongani received the update he had been waiting for. "We have a location." The room went still. Where, he asked. An industrial area on the edge of the city, old warehouses, mostly unused. Bongani's eyes darkened. Of course, a place where things could happen without being seen. "How sure are we, Very?" That was enough. Bongani didn't hesitate. "Prepare the team." Within minutes, everything was in motion again. Vehicles, personnel, equipment. But this time, this wasn't defense. This was pursuit. Nomsa found him just before he left. "You're going after him," she said. Bongani looked at her. "Yes, that's dangerous." "So was coming into my house," he replied. Nomsa stepped closer. "What if it's a trap?" Bongani didn't deny it. "It probably is." "Then why go?" Bongani held her gaze. "Because if I don't end this now, it doesn't end." Silence. Nomsa understood that. She had lived that reality. Running didn't stop danger, it only delayed it. "Be careful," she said quietly. Bongani nodded once, then he turned and left. The drive was silent, focused. The city stretched out around them, unaware of what was unfolding beneath its surface. When they reached the location, everything slowed. The warehouse stood isolated, its structure worn but solid, its windows dark. No visible movement, but that meant nothing. "Positions," Bongani ordered. The team spread out, precise, disciplined. Bongani moved forward himself, because this part, he needed to see. Inside the air was cold, empty, too empty. Bongani's eyes scanned the space. Then a voice. "You came." Bongani turned. A man stepped out from the shadows. Alone, calm, exactly as Nomsa had described. "You're not hard to find," Bongani said. The man smiled slightly. "I wasn't hiding." Clearly. A pause. "Then you've caused me some inconvenience," the man continued. Bongani's expression didn't change. "You tried to take my daughter." The man tilted his head. "And you've taken far more from people than that." There it was. The motive. Clear, sharp. "You're one of them," Bongani said. "One of many," the man replied. Silence stretched between them. Then Bongani stepped forward slightly. "This ends now." The man laughed softly. "You still think you control how this ends?" Before Bongani could respond, movement from the shadows. More men, not many but enough. The trap. Bongani didn't flinch, because he had expected it. Now he said calmly, and everything exploded into motion. Not chaos, but precision. His team moved instantly, surrounding, disarming, controlling every angle. The man's confidence cracked for the first time. This wasn't. No, Bongani interrupted. It wasn't. Within seconds, it was over. The man stood restrained, his earlier calm replaced by something darker. Bongani stepped closer. "This is what happens," he said quietly, "when you mistake patience for weakness." The man said nothing, because now he understood. This wasn't a man he could outplay. This was a man who finished things. By nightfall, Bongani returned home. The house felt different again, not tense, not heavy, but settled, as if something had been removed. Something dangerous. He found Nomsa and Lerato in the living room. Lerato ran to him immediately. "Papa." He lifted her, holding her tightly. "It's over," he said softly, and this time it was true. Nomsa stood a few steps away, watching, quiet. Bongani looked at her. For a long moment, neither spoke. "Then thank you," he said. Nomsa shook her head slightly. "I almost, but you didn't," he interrupted. Silence, then he continued. "You stayed." Nomsa's eyes filled. "Yes," Bongani nodded slowly. "You're not staff anymore." She blinked. "What, your family?" he said simply. The words settled gently, but deeply, because they weren't said lightly. They were earned, and for the first time, Nomsa allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. Real, unconditional, and beside her, Lerato smiled, because in her world, that had always been true. Sometimes the greatest battles in life are not fought with strength, but with choice. Nomsa stood at a crossroads where fear and love demanded opposite things. She could have chosen survival at the cost of innocence. She could have walked away with money, safety, and silence, but she didn't. She chose to protect a child who trusted her. And that choice changed everything. Bongani, a man who built his world on power, learned something deeper: that trust is not bought and loyalty is not commanded, it is earned. In the moments when someone has every reason to walk away but chooses to stay, in the end it wasn't wealth that saved his daughter. It was a heart that refused to betray. So, tell me, what would you have done in her place? Comment below your country and the time you're watching this from. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this remind us that even in the darkest moments, kindness still has the power to win.